My own son told me I was nothing but a burden before locking me in the dark cellar of the farmhouse I had worked my whole life to keep. He smashed my phone and left me without food or water while he and his wife enjoyed a luxury trip. What he did not know was that the basement he tried to use as my prison was also the place where I had been gathering every secret, every proof of his betrayal. This is not just another family drama, it is the story of how decades of sacrifice turned into a war for survival and dignity. How could a mother who gave everything to her son end up betrayed by the very blood she raised? Stay with me to uncover the shocking truth. If you find this story powerful, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Now let me take you back to where it all began. The last thing I heard before the heavy door slammed shut was my son's voice, sharp and cold like I had never heard it before. "You are finished here, old woman." His words echoed through the dark cellar as the lock clicked into place. I tried to push against the door, but it would not move. Then I heard the sound that made my heart sink. The crash of my phone as he threw it against the concrete wall, shattering my only connection to the outside world. My son Daniel had locked me away, hidden beneath the farmhouse I had built with my bare hands, and left me there to rot. At 68 years old, after everything I had given up for him, I found myself in the same position as a forgotten prisoner. My hands trembled in the cold, my chest tightened with panic, and my mind screamed in disbelief. How could my son, the boy I raised alone after his father's sudden death, treat me as if I were a criminal? How could he look me in the eye and condemn me to silence and darkness? I sat on the dirt floor trying to gather my breath as the reality of what had just happened settled into my bones. Above me I heard faint sounds of movement, voices blending together, and then the roar of an engine starting. Daniel, his wife Claudia, and her cunning brother Victor were leaving. They had packed their bags for a luxurious vacation, talking about champagne and sandy beaches while I sat beneath the ground like an unwanted burden. I heard the tires crunch on the gravel, drive the fading hum of the car, and then silence. A silence so heavy that it pressed against my ears until I could hear nothing but the beating of my own heart. The cellar was damp and carried the scent of earth and mildew. Wooden beams lined the ceiling, and tiny shafts of light slipped through narrow cracks, painting thin silver lines across the walls. My breath turned to fog in the cold air, and I realized that there was no food, no water, no blanket, nothing but darkness and the cruel memory of Daniel's eyes as he pushed me inside. I had spent my entire life sacrificing for him, and now he was leaving me to die in the house that once echoed with laughter and love. I tried to tell myself it was a mistake, that perhaps he only wanted to frighten me, to teach me some twisted lesson about letting go of the past. But deep inside I knew the truth. This was not an accident. This was planned. Daniel had chosen Claudia's voice over mine, Claudia's greed over my love, Claudia's plans over the life I had spent decades building for him. The son I once rocked to sleep in my arms was gone. What remained was a man whose heart had turned to stone. I pulled myself into the corner, knees to my chest, listening to the echoes of my thoughts. How did it come to this? How did the boy who once clung to me after his nightmares grow into a man who treated me as the nightmare? The memories came rushing back uninvited, as if the cellar walls themselves demanded that I remember. I saw Daniel as a little boy standing by the window waiting for me to come home from work, his face lighting up the moment he saw me. I remembered the nights I stayed awake, sewing my fingers bleeding from the needle, just to buy him a new coat for winter. I remembered the sacrifices that no one else saw, the wedding ring I sold to pay for his college books, the years I went without vacations, new clothes, or even medical care so that he would never feel the sting of poverty. But all of those memories felt like fragile paper in a fire, burned away by the reality of his betrayal. The cellar grew colder, and I hugged myself tighter, whispering words of comfort I no longer believed. I wanted to scream, to shout, to call his name until the sound shook the earth itself. Yet what good would that do? He had left me here on purpose. He wanted me silenced, out of the way, erased from the picture of the perfect life he was trying to build with Claudia and Victor. Still beneath the despair, a small ember of anger began to glow. I thought of Claudia's smirk, the way she looked at me as though I were nothing more than a faded photograph that should be torn up and thrown away. I thought of Victor's mocking laughter when he walked through my kitchen, his greedy eyes measuring every corner of the farmhouse as if it already belonged to him. And I thought of Daniel, my son, who once promised he would always stand by me, now siding with them as if I were the enemy. The anger gave me strength, even if only a little. I stood slowly, my knees cracking under the weight of age and sorrow. I pressed my palms against the cold stone wall, running my fingers along the edges, until I found the old wooden shelves where I had once stored canned peaches and jars of pickles. Memories of summers past washed over me, but they did not comfort me. They hardened me. For I realized this cellar, this place he thought would be my tomb, was also a place that held my history, my endurance, my resilience. Time seemed to crawl, and in that crawling silence I made myself a promise. If I survived this, if I found a way to walk out of this cellar alive, I would not remain the obedient mother who bowed her head to her son's cruelty. I would no longer live as if my only worth was tied to the love of a child who despised me. No, I would rise from this darkness with a strength they had never seen, a strength that would force them to see me, not as a burden, but as a reckoning. The night crept in, though. In the cellar it was impossible to tell the difference between day and dark. My stomach ached with hunger, my throat burned with thirst, but my mind grew sharper with every passing hour. Daniel thought he had silenced me. Claudia believed she had erased me. Victor imagined he had already taken my place. They would all learn soon enough that locking me in this cellar was the biggest mistake of their lives. Because what they did not know was that I had been preparing for their betrayal long before this night. I had seen the changes in Daniel's eyes, heard the venom in Claudia's voice, and felt the greed in Victor's presence. I had known this moment might come, and I had made plans they would never see coming. And as I sat in the dark waiting for my chance, I knew this was only the beginning. As I sat shivering in that cellar, the memories kept pouring in, uninvited but unstoppable. The cold stone floor beneath me felt as unforgiving as the years that had passed, each one marked by sacrifice, each one shaped around the boy I once called my reason for living, my son Daniel. To understand why I was here, I had to go back to the very beginning, to the day my life stopped being about me and became entirely about him. I was only 28 when tragedy struck. My husband Thomas went to work at the steel factory one morning and never came home. A boiler exploded, killing 3 men instantly. Thomas was one of them. The news shattered me, and I remember holding little Daniel, only 5 years old at the time, while the weight of widowhood pressed down on my shoulders. I thought I would not survive it, but then I looked into my boy's tearful eyes and knew I had no choice. From that moment forward, my life's mission was clear. I would raise him alone, protect him, and give him everything he needed to rise above the hand fate had dealt us. The years that followed were a blur of work and exhaustion. By day, I was a librarian at the local school. By night, I tutored children whose parents could afford extra lessons. Every penny I earned, every drop of sweat went to the same cause, Daniel. I stopped buying new clothes for myself, mended old dresses until the fabric was more thread than cloth, and learned to live with hunger on nights when there was not enough food for both of us. My body grew thin, my hands rough, but my heart was full each time I saw him smile. One memory stands out clearer than all the rest. Daniel was 10 when he came home from school in tears. His classmates had laughed at his worn-out shoes. Shoes I had patched so many times. The soles were more stitching than leather. That night while he slept, I went to the drawer where I had been saving money for months, a little fund I hoped to use for a winter coat for myself. Without a second thought, I took that money and bought him the best pair of shoes in the store. When he woke the next morning and slipped them on his face, lit up like the sun after a storm. That joy was worth more to me than any comfort I could have given myself. It went on like that year after year. When he turned 16, Daniel begged me for a motorbike. I worked double shifts at the library cataloging books until my eyes burned so I could put down the deposit. I told myself it was worth it because a young man needed his independence, his freedom. When he reached 18, I sold my mother's silver jewelry heirlooms that had been in our family for generations just to pay for his college applications. And when he was accepted to law school at the state university, I made the biggest sacrifice of all. I mortgaged the farmhouse. The home that had been my safe haven, the place Thomas and I had built together, was put on the line so that Daniel could study without worrying about money. I told myself it was temporary, that once he became a lawyer with a fine salary, he would help me pay it back. More than that, I believed he would look at me with gratitude, that he would see every wrinkle in my face and know each one was carved there by nights spent working for his future. For years I carried that dream like a lantern in the dark. It was the light that guided me through the loneliness, the fatigue, the endless cycle of giving without receiving, and for a time I thought the dream had come true. When Daniel graduated with honors, I felt like the proudest mother alive. I stood in the audience with tears streaming down my face as he walked across that stage in his black robe. He smiled at me then, a smile so radiant it felt like all my sacrifices had been worth it. Afterward, he hugged me tighter than ever and whispered, "I will make you proud, Mom." I believed him with all my heart. The first years after his graduation were everything I had hoped for. Daniel visited, often taking me out to dinner, buying me small gifts, and talking about his new job at a prestigious law firm. He would laugh and say, "None of this would have been possible without you, Mom." For a while, I lived in that bliss, convinced that my sacrifices had not been in vain. I told my neighbors proudly about my son, the lawyer, how successful he was, how kind, how attentive. I wore my exhaustion like a medal proof of a battle fought and won. But underneath the joy, cracks were already forming. Looking back now, I can see them clearly. There were moments when Daniel grew impatient with my old-fashioned ways, rolling his eyes when I asked simple questions about his work. There were times when he seemed embarrassed by the farmhouse, its worn furniture and creaking floors, as though it did not fit the image of the man he was becoming. At the time, I brushed it off, telling myself it was only the natural gap between generations. I never imagined that those small cracks would widen into a chasm so deep it would swallow everything we once shared. Now, sitting in the darkness of the cellar, I wondered if I had been blind all along. Had I raised my son to be ungrateful by giving him too much? Had my sacrifices meant to secure his future instead, taught him to see me as nothing more than a resource to drain? These questions haunted me as much as the silence. The farmhouse mortgaged for his education was now the very place where I was locked away. The shoes I had once bought with such joy, the motorbike, the law degree, all of it felt like a cruel joke. My love had built him up, but it had also built the prison where I now Saturday, and yet even as tears burned my eyes, I felt a strange strength grow inside me. The story of my life was not finished, and it would not end here in the dark. Daniel thought he had written the final chapter by locking me in this cellar. But he had only turned the page to a new one he would never expect, because this was not just the story of sacrifice, it was the beginning of a reckoning. For a short while after Daniel began his career, I still believed my sacrifices had not been wasted. He visited on weekends, sometimes surprising me with flowers or a box of pastries from the city. We would sit at the old kitchen table, the one Thomas had built with his own hands, and talk about his cases, his dreams, his plans for the future. Those were the moments when I thought I could finally breathe, when I felt that the years of hunger, debt, and endless work had finally been rewarded. But everything began to change the day he brought Claudia home. I remember it as if it were yesterday. Daniel walked through the door with his usual smile, but this time he was not alone. At his side was a tall woman with sleek hair, the color of polished chestnut, and a perfume so sharp it lingered in the air long after she moved. Her heels clicked against my worn wooden floor, as though she were walking on a stage, and her eyes scanned the farmhouse with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. "Mom, this is Claudia," Daniel announced with pride. "She works in corporate events management. We've been seeing each other for a few months now." Claudia extended her hand with a smile that stopped at her lips and never reached her eyes. When her fingers touched mine, I felt no warmth. Instead, there was a chill, a signal that this woman was not here to join my family but to claim territory. I tried to be gracious. I invited her into the kitchen, poured her tea, and served the apple pie I had baked earlier that morning. She took a polite bite and said, "It's quaint." That single word cut deeper than if she had spat it out entirely. To her, my efforts were not something to enjoy, but something to endure. Over the weeks that followed, Claudia's presence became more frequent. Daniel seemed enchanted by her confidence, her ability to talk about high society parties, luxury travel, and clients with endless wealth. I noticed small changes in him. He began to dress more sharply, no longer in the modest suits he once wore proudly, but in tailored outfits that seemed chosen to impress her world rather than mine. He spoke less of the cases that excited him and more about the contacts Claudia was introducing him to. My son was being reshaped before my very eyes, and the woman holding the chisel was Claudia. I did my best to welcome her. I cooked her favorite dishes after Daniel casually mentioned them. I bought her small gifts, even though I could hardly afford them, just to show her she was accepted. I even learned to prepare food I had never eaten in my life, trying recipes from glossy magazines so she would not feel out of place in my simple farmhouse. But each gesture was met with that same tight smile, that same glance of thinly veiled pity, as if she were tolerating an old woman who did not understand her place. One evening after a family dinner, I overheard her talking to Daniel in the yard. Her voice was low but sharp enough to pierce through the thin window. "Your mother clings too much," she said. "If you want a future with me, we need boundaries. She cannot keep interfering in our lives." My breath caught in my throat. The boy who once held my hand during thunderstorms now stood silent as another woman spoke of me like an inconvenience. His only reply was a quiet murmur, but the fact that he did not defend me struck deeper than any shouted insult. By the time they announced their engagement, Claudia had taken complete control. The wedding plans were hers from start to finish. When I timidly suggested that we include one of our family traditions like the quilt Thomas's mother had sewn for newlyweds, Claudia laughed softly and said, "This is a modern wedding, Margaret. Guests would not appreciate outdated customs." Daniel simply nodded, avoiding my eyes, and changed the subject. On the day of the wedding, I sat in the front row wearing a green dress I had bought from the discount rack, while Claudia floated down the aisle in a gown worth more than my entire savings account. The ceremony was beautiful, at least to those who looked only at the surface. To me, it felt like a performance staged to keep me silent and out of sight. When the minister spoke about honoring parents, Claudia squeezed Daniel's hand with a smile that sent ice through my veins. That night after the reception, I hosted a small dinner at the farmhouse for close relatives. I tried to hold on to my role as his mother, preparing food, setting the table, doing what I had always done. But as I carried dishes back into the kitchen, I passed by the open window and froze. Outside, under the moonlight, Claudia spoke with her brother Victor, a man whose sly grin and shifting eyes had unsettled me from the moment we met. "Now that we're married, we need to make sure Daniel keeps his focus," Claudia said. "He is too soft with his mother. If we do not set limits, she will drag him down." Victor chuckled, his voice dripping with cruelty. "Men like Daniel need firm direction. A meddling mother can ruin a marriage. Better to cut her out before she causes real trouble." Their laughter carried through the night air, a cruel soundtrack to the shattering of my illusions. I pressed my hand to the window frame, steadying myself as my heart broke in silence. My efforts to welcome Claudia, my sacrifices to support Daniel, all of it had been dismissed as weakness. They were already planning my removal from his life. I returned to the kitchen, finished cleaning, and smiled politely at guests as they left. But inside I was hollow. That night, lying in my bed, I stared at the ceiling and felt a deep emptiness I had never known before. For the first time since Thomas's death, I felt truly alone. The months that followed only confirmed my fears. Daniel's visits grew less frequent. When he did come, Claudia was always by his side, controlling every conversation, steering him away from me. She would interrupt when he began to reminisce, reminding him of their busy schedules, their social plans, their new circle of wealthy friends. And when she was not speaking, her eyes said everything. I was no longer his family. I was an obstacle. The farmhouse, once filled with warmth, grew colder with each passing season. I kept setting an extra place at the table, hoping Daniel would come, but more often than not it remained empty. I told myself he was busy, that this was only a phase, but deep down I knew the truth. Claudia's intrusion was no accident. It was a strategy, and slowly, piece by piece, I was being erased. What I did not know then was how far she and Victor would go, or how completely Daniel would let himself be led by them. I thought I had already seen the worst of betrayal, but the true devastation was still to come. The Daniel who once sat at my kitchen table with laughter in his eyes began to vanish before my very eyes. In his place emerged someone colder, harder, and far more distant. I had raised a boy who hugged me after school, who shared secrets with me in whispers, who once promised he would take care of me when I grew old. But now when I looked at him, I no longer saw my son. I saw a stranger who carried his face but not his heart. At first, the change came quietly like a draft slipping under a door. Our conversations became shorter, our time together always rushed. He no longer lingered for pie or coffee, no longer asked about my health, my garden, or the neighbors. When he visited, he brought Claudia, and she steered every word, every subject until the man I had known was drowned out by her voice. She spoke of investments, real estate, and promotions, while Daniel nodded along, his eyes fixed on her as if she were the only person worth listening to. I told myself that all newlyweds drift away a little, that it was natural for him to focus on his wife. But each week the distance grew wider until the chasm between us felt impossible to cross. I began to dread his visits, not because I did not want to see him, but because each one reminded me of how far he had already gone. The first time Daniel spoke to me with open contempt is a memory that still burns. I had spent the morning preparing his favorite meal, the chicken stew I had made for him since he was a child. I set the table with his old ceramic plate decorated with red flowers, the one he had always insisted on using for special meals. When he arrived, I felt a flicker of hope because for once Claudia was not with him. I thought perhaps this would be our moment, a chance to reconnect, to speak heart to heart, but the look in his eyes when he stepped into the kitchen was not the look of a son coming home. It was the look of a man carrying a burden he resented. He sat stiffly at the table, barely kissing my cheek, and sighed as though being there was a chore. "Mom, we need to talk," he said flatly, his eyes avoiding mine as I placed the steaming bowl before him. "What is it, Daniel?" I asked, forcing a smile, trying to keep my voice steady. "Claudia and I have been talking." He began stirring the stew without taking a bite, "and we think it would be better if we started having more space." His words struck me like ice water. "Space? What do you mean?" He sighed, dropping the spoon with a clatter. "It means constant visits are affecting our marriage. Claudia feels we don't have enough intimacy because I'm always here. You rely on me too much, Mom. It's suffocating." My heart stopped. "Suffocating, Daniel. You come once a week. How can that suffocate anyone? I just want to see you. You are all I have." His face twisted, and for the first time I saw anger in his eyes. "Exactly. That's the problem. I'm the only thing you have. I can't keep being responsible for your happiness. I'm 30 years old. I have my own life now." The words pierced deeper than any knife. I had given everything for him. I had sacrificed my youth, my comfort, even my dreams of love after his father died. And now he sat at my table telling me my love was nothing but a burden. I tried to answer, but my voice broke. "I never asked you to be responsible for my happiness, Daniel. I just asked you to love me as I have loved you. Is that too much?" He shook his head, his jaw tightening. "Love shouldn't be a prison. You need to understand that I have new priorities now. Claudia and I have a new family. You can't expect me to live to please you anymore." That afternoon he left without finishing his meal. I sat alone in the kitchen, staring at the full plate of stew growing cold as tears blurred my vision. Something inside me cracked that day. For the first time I wondered if all my sacrifices had been for nothing, if the boy I had raised with such devotion had been gone for longer than I dared admit. The weeks that followed were worse. Daniel's visits became sporadic. When he did come, Claudia was always there, making sure he never lingered. She interrupted when we spoke, shifted the conversation toward their trips or her career, and reminded him of their obligations. "Your mother looks tired," she would say with mock concern. "Maybe we should go, Daniel." She spoke as though I were a frail old woman rather than the mother who had built his future with her bare hands. The son who once defended me fiercely against playground bullies now defended Claudia against me. If she made a cruel remark about my outdated furniture or humble meals, he remained silent. If she looked at me with disdain, he looked away. Each silence was another betrayal. Then came the day when he asked me for money. He arrived with Claudia at his side, her smile sugary but her eyes gleaming with calculation. "Mom, we need a little help," Daniel said casually. "Claudia's car broke down and she needs something more fitting for her work. Could you lend us $5,000 for the down payment? $5,000. It was nearly all the savings I had scraped together over decades, the money I had reserved for emergencies, for medical care, for the roof repairs I had been postponing. But when I looked into his face, desperate to see some trace of the boy I once knew, I found myself nodding. Of course, Daniel. When do you need it? Tomorrow would be perfect, he said, smiling for the first time in weeks. I promise I'll pay you back in 3 months. 3 months passed, then 6, then 8. Each time I asked gently about the loan, he had a new excuse. The car had unexpected repairs. Claudia needed to fund a business trip. They were renovating their new house. The money was gone, and so was his promise. I told myself it was only money, that perhaps he truly was struggling. But deep inside, I knew the truth. He did not see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as an open purse, as a resource to drain when convenient. And yet, even as I tried to deny it, I knew I had only glimpsed the beginning of his transformation. Claudia and Victor were not done yet. They had bigger plans, and Daniel was ready to follow wherever they led. What I did not know then was how cruel his next betrayal would be, or how close I was to losing him forever. The farmhouse had always been my refuge. Its walls carried memories of laughter, tears, and the countless sacrifices that had built Daniel's future. But as autumn turned to a bitter winter, those walls became a cage. The air inside felt heavier each day, as though it carried the weight of my son's contempt. The silence was the loudest sound, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the living room. And then one November morning I woke up with a cough so sharp it cut through my chest like broken glass. At first I told myself it was only a cold. I brewed tea, wrapped myself in blankets, and tried to rest. But within days the cough deepened. Fever swept through my body like wildfire, leaving me drenched in sweat one moment and shivering uncontrollably the next. My lungs burned with every breath. I knew these were not the signs of a simple cold. Pneumonia had struck me before years ago, and I recognized the enemy returning. Desperate, I reached for the phone and called Daniel. My hands trembled as I pressed the buttons, my voice weak when he answered. "Daniel, it's me," I whispered. "I'm sick. I think it's serious. I need you to take me to the doctor." There was a pause on the other end, long enough for my heart to sink. Then his voice, cold and impatient, cut through the line. "I can't, Mom. Claudia and I have an appointment with the architect for the new house. It took months to get this meeting. We can't cancel." I pressed the phone harder against my ear, as though trying to squeeze compassion out of him. "Daniel, please. I feel so weak. I'm afraid I might pass out. It would only take an hour." He sighed loudly, the kind of sigh one gives when dealing with an inconvenience. "Can't you call a neighbor? Or a friend? Claudia says you need to learn to be more independent. Adults your age should know how to manage without leaning on others all the time," Claudia says. Those 2 words felt like daggers. Every sentence he spoke carried her fingerprints. "Daniel," I said, my voice cracking, "I'm your mother. Since when did I become a burden you push away?" "Oh, Mom, don't be so dramatic," he snapped. "It's just the flu. Drink some tea, get some rest. You'll be fine." Before I could plead again, the line went dead. He had hung up. I sat there with the receiver pressed to my ear, my body shaking with fever and my soul shaking with something worse, betrayal. My son, the boy I had nearly destroyed myself to raise, had chosen blueprints and renovations over his mother's life. Tears fell onto my blanket, hot as fire, as the reality washed over me. I was not sick and afraid in my home. I was sick and abandoned in my prison. Hours passed in a blur. My fever rose higher. My breaths grew shorter. I thought of calling him again, but what good would it do? His answer would be the same. "Claudia says. Claudia thinks. Claudia believes." The words of a woman who had poisoned his love until there was none left for me. By evening I could barely stand. My hands shook as I tried to carry a glass of water from the sink, spilling half of it on the floor. I collapsed into the chair by the kitchen table, coughing until it felt like knives tore through my chest. My vision blurred, and I wondered if this was how it would end. Alone in the very house I had mortgaged for his education. Alone in the home I had built for the family that no longer claimed me. Then came a knock at the door. Weakly I rose and shuffled across the floor. On the porch stood Ruth, my neighbor, holding a basket of soup and bread. She gasped when she saw me. "Margaret, you look terrible. Why didn't you call me?" I broke down, sobbing into her arms as she guided me back inside. That night, Ruth became my lifeline. She checked my fever, gave me medicine, spoon-fed me broth when I was too weak to lift the spoon myself. She stayed through the night, changing my sweat-soaked sheets, whispering encouragement, as though she were the mother and I the child. In the days that followed, Ruth cared for me more tenderly than my own son. Each time I looked at her face, lined with age, yet glowing with kindness, I wondered why Daniel could not see me as she did. Why did a neighbor who owed me nothing show more love than the boy who owed me everything? 2 weeks later, when the fever finally broke, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, no longer the same woman. Something inside me had shifted. During those long nights of pain and silence, I had seen the truth too clearly to ignore. Daniel did not see me as his mother anymore. He saw me as a weight, an obstacle, an inconvenience. My love had become his chain, and he wanted to break free. But I also realized something else. I was done begging. I was done waiting by the phone, done giving until there was nothing left. If Daniel wanted space, I would give it to him, but not in the way he imagined. No longer would I be the servant he could summon, the wallet he could empty, or the shadow he could dismiss. I would no longer be his safety net. When Ruth visited again, she found me sitting up, my eyes clear, my voice steady. "It's over," I told her. "I will not live like this anymore. If my son wants to treat me like a stranger, then I will treat him as one. I will take back what little life I have left." She placed her hand gently on mine. "It's about time, Margaret. It's about time you chose yourself." Her words echoed in my heart long after she left. I felt lighter, as if a chain had been broken. For decades, I had lived only for Daniel, shaping my every decision around his happiness. But now, for the first time in my life, I felt the stirrings of my own. What I did not know was that my decision to reclaim my dignity would ignite a firestorm. Daniel and Claudia would not accept a mother who dared to defy them. And the next time he came through that farmhouse door, it would not be with love in his eyes, it would be with fury. It had been only 3 weeks since I told myself I would no longer live at my son's mercy. 3 weeks since I swore to reclaim my dignity. I thought Daniel might drift quietly away, that perhaps he and Claudia would simply stop coming. But instead, one gray afternoon, I heard the tires on the gravel outside and knew my reckoning had arrived. The front door burst open without a knock. Daniel marched inside with Claudia at his side, her expensive coat glittering with gold buttons. She walked as if she owned the place, her eyes sweeping across the room like a queen inspecting a servant's quarters. "We need to talk," Daniel barked, dropping himself into the armchair where he had once curled up as a boy while I read him bedtime stories. I stood in the doorway of the kitchen, my hands still damp from washing dishes. "Then talk," I said flatly. He leaned forward, his jaw clenched. "Why are you telling people lies about us?" The neighbors are whispering. "Anne told her sister, you said I abandoned you when you were sick. Now it's spreading all over town. Do you realize the damage this could do to my reputation at work?" I blinked in disbelief. "Your reputation. That's what matters to you. Not the fact that your mother lay in bed with a fever wondering if she would live or die while you chose an architect over her." Claudia stepped in before he could answer. "Margaret, you really need to stop this drama. You're 68 years old. It's time to grow up and stop acting like a spoiled teenager begging for attention." The room fell silent, the insult hanging in the air like a poison cloud. I turned my eyes to Daniel, waiting for him to defend me, to say something, anything. But he stared at the floor, silent as a coward. I felt something inside me snap. "I see," I said slowly. "You're going to sit there and let your wife spit venom in my house, and you won't lift a finger to defend me." Finally, Daniel looked up, but his eyes carried no remorse, only irritation. "Mom, she's not disrespecting you. She's telling you the truth you need to hear. You can't keep acting like the victim in every situation." The victim. The words slammed into me with the weight of all the sacrifices I had made. I stepped forward, my voice rising, fueled by months of humiliation. The victim. I'm the victim because I expected the smallest shred of respect from my only son. I'm the victim because I asked you to care if I was alive or dead when I lay with a fever of 104. That's your definition of victim. "It was just the flu," Daniel shouted, standing to face me. "You can't expect me to cancel my whole life for that." My hands trembled, but not from fear, from rage. It wasn't just the flu. It was your mother, sick and terrified, begging her son to sit with her for 1 hour. It was the woman who worked double shifts so you could wear fine shoes. The woman who mortgaged her house so you could study law. The woman who gave up every chance at love so that you could build your life. And now you tell me it was nothing, that I was nothing. His face twisted, and then he said the words that shattered me. No one asked you to sacrifice your life for me. Those were your choices, your mistakes. For a moment the world tilted. My ears rang, my knees threatened to buckle. My son, the boy I had raised with love fierce enough to burn me alive, had just reduced my life to mistakes. And then, as if some unseen force guided me, I walked to the small drawer in the side table where I kept my important papers. My hands no longer shook. I pulled out the envelope that held my will, the one naming Daniel as my sole heir. "You're right," I said, my voice cold, calm, terrifying even to me. They were my choices, my mistakes, and now I'll correct them. Daniel frowned, confused. "What are you talking about?" Without another word, I walked to the shredder I had bought months ago. Slowly, deliberately, I slid the will inside. The paper caught the machine word, and within seconds the document disintegrated into strips. Claudia gasped, her face turning pale. Daniel lunged forward too late. The will was gone. "What did you just do?" Claudia shrieked. "I corrected my mistake," I said, my voice steady. "I erased the name of a son who despises me from my inheritance." Daniel's face turned red. "Mom, you can't be serious. I'm your only son. That house, those savings, they're mine. You can't just I interrupted. And I did. My house, my savings, my choice. You said it yourself." Claudia's mask cracked. Her voice rose into a shrill panic. "You can't disinherit your own son just because of an argument. That's insane." An argument? I turned on her, my eyes blazing. "This is not an argument. This is the result of years of contempt. Years of being treated like garbage in my own home. You both pushed me until I broke. And now you'll see what that costs." Daniel stepped closer, his tone low and dangerous. "You're going to reverse this, Mom. You're going to call your lawyer and write a new will with my name on it. Or else what?" I asked, standing my ground. "You'll abandon me again. You already did. You'll threaten me. Do it. You'll find out what happens when you push a mother past the edge." His eyes darkened. Claudia reached for his arm, whispering frantically, but he shoved her hand away. "You don't understand, Mom. Without that inheritance, everything falls apart. The house, the plans, the future Claudia and I are building. You will destroy us." I let out a bitter laugh. "Destroy you, no, Daniel. You destroyed yourself the moment you chose greed over love. The moment you chose Claudia's voice over your mother's. You want to see destruction? Watch me." I walked to the drawer again and pulled out a blank notebook. In bold letters on the first page, I wrote the name of a local foundation for single mothers. I turned the notebook toward them. "This is where my money will go, to women who actually know what sacrifice means, not to children who spit on it." The color drained from Daniel's face. Claudia's lips trembled. For the first time since she entered my life, she looked afraid. Daniel took another step toward me, his fists clenched, his breath ragged. "You don't mean this." "Oh, I mean every word I said," my voice steel. "And if you ever come here again to threaten me, you'll find out just how strong a woman you thought was weak can be." Silence filled the room, broken only by the hum of the shredder still cooling. My son stared at me, his chest rising and falling like a man on the verge of violence. Claudia tugged at his sleeve, urging him toward the door, but his eyes remained locked on mine, filled with fury, fear, and something darker. At last he spoke. "You'll regret this, Mom. You'll regret everything." They stormed out, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. I stood in the middle of the living room, the shredded paper still warm in the bin, my heart pounding like a drum. For the first time in my life, I did not feel like a mother. I felt like a woman who had declared war, but I also knew this was only the beginning. Their greed would not stop here, and neither would I. The echo of the slammed door still rattled the windows when I heard it. Heavy footsteps pounding back across the porch. Before I could even catch my breath, the door flew open again. Daniel stormed inside, his face red, his chest heaving. Claudia trailed behind him, her voice sharp with panic. "Daniel, stop. Think about what you're doing," she cried. but he shook her off like a man possessed. He pointed a trembling finger at me, his voice low and menacing. "You are not going to destroy everything I've built. You're not going to take my future away from me, Mom. Not after all I've done. All you've done." My voice cracked into bitter laughter. "You mean the lies, the neglect, the abandonment? What have you built, Daniel, except a life on the back of my sacrifices?" His eyes narrowed. "Don't twist this. I'm the one who pulled us out of poverty. I'm the one with a career, with respect, with a life worth something. And you think you can tear it all down because of a tantrum? No, Mom. Not this time." I stood tall, though my knees trembled. "I already told you. The money, the house, the will, it's mine. My choice. And you have no claim to it anymore." He took a step closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that chilled me. "If you don't put me back in that will, you'll regret it. You'll regret it until the day you die." Claudia's mask cracked again, her voice shrill. "Daniel, stop threatening her. This isn't how we handle it. We'll use lawyers. We'll contest. But violence, be quiet," he snapped, whirling on her. "You wanted this house. You wanted the money. Don't you dare tell me to back down now." For the first time since she entered our lives, Claudia actually looked frightened. She stepped back, her eyes darting between me and him, as though she wasn't sure who was the bigger danger. Daniel turned back to me, his face twisted in rage. "You think you're strong now, don't you? You think shredding that paper makes you powerful. But you're still just an old woman living alone in a creaking farmhouse. Do you really think anyone will be there for you when you're 80, when you can't walk, when you can't even feed yourself?" His words were poison, but I refused to let them pierce me. I drew in a steady breath. I'd rather die alone than live as a slave to a son who despises me. That did it. His face contorted, and in 2 strides he was on me. He grabbed the phone from the table when I reached for it, ripping the cord from the wall with such violence the receiver shattered against the floor. There he hissed, "No more calling the police, no more calling anyone. You are at our mercy now." The pieces of the phone scattered across the wooden boards, glittering like the remnants of my last lifeline. Fear shot through me, sharp and cold, but alongside it came something stronger. Fury. "You just proved everything I said about you," I spat. "You're no son of mine. You're a stranger who thinks he can bully me into submission. But you'll see, Daniel, you've underestimated me for the last time." For a moment I thought he might strike me. His fists clenched his jaw, locked his chest, rising and falling in furious waves. But then Claudia stepped between us, her voice trembling now. "Daniel, stop. This isn't going to get us what we want. You're scaring her." "Good," he growled. "She needs to be scared." I stared at him, unflinching. "You think fear will break me. You think smashing a phone makes me helpless. You don't know me anymore, Daniel. I survived widowhood. I survived years of working 2 jobs so you could eat. I survived illness and loneliness. And I will survive you." His lips curled, half snarl, half smirk. "We'll see about that." He stormed out again, this time dragging Claudia with him, her heels scraping against the floor. The door slammed so hard I thought the frame would splinter. The silence that followed was suffocating. I stood staring at the shards of the phone, my body trembling from the adrenaline coursing through me. For the first time, I wasn't just hurt, I was afraid. The boy I had raised was gone, replaced by a man who looked at me with the same cold eyes Thomas once carried in his worst moments. A man capable of anything. But fear is a strange thing. It can crush you, or it can carve you into something harder. As I knelt to gather the broken pieces of the phone, I felt no tears, only a strange, steady calm. They thought they had silenced me. They thought by ripping the cord and smashing the receiver they had cut off my last line of defense. What they did not know was that 3 months ago I had seen this moment coming. I had bought another phone. A small cell phone I kept hidden beneath my mattress, charged and ready, waiting for the day when Daniel finally crossed the line. That night, after I was sure their car had left the driveway for good, I pulled it out and dialed the one person I knew I could trust. "Ruth," I whispered when she answered. "It's Margaret. I need you to come." Something happened. And I think it's only going to get worse. Within 20 minutes, Ruth was in my living room, her eyes wide as she looked at the shattered phone. "Margaret, this is serious. He destroyed your phone. He threatened you. This isn't just family tension anymore. This is abuse." I poured her tea with hands that no longer trembled. I know, and I'm going to handle it, but not the way they expect. Ruth leaned forward, her voice urgent. You need to call the police. Not yet, I said, a calm smile tugging at my lips. They think they've broken me. They think tomorrow I'll crawl to the lawyer and make them heirs again. But I'm going to give them exactly what they want, only not in the way they expect. Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I leaned closer, lowering my voice, though the house was empty but for us. I mean, it's time they saw who I really am, not the weak old woman they think they control, but the woman who's been watching, listening, gathering, preparing. Ruth's eyes widened as she realized what I meant. You've been keeping records. I nodded. Every word, every insult, every threat. They thought I was broken, but I was documenting. And when the time comes, they'll see the evidence. All of it. She gripped my hand tightly. Margaret, are you sure? This could be dangerous. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. My voice was calm, my heart steady. The fear had transformed into something stronger, resolve. Tomorrow Daniel and Claudia would return, certain they had crushed me, certain they would bend me back under their control. What they didn't know was that they were walking into the very trap I had been setting for months. The morning after Daniel smashed my phone, I rose before the Sunday. The house was quiet, too quiet, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. I moved slowly, deliberately, every action planned. Today was the day. Today, the mask would drop not from me, but from them. I began by setting the stage. I tucked the small cell phone deep into the cushions of the sofa, recording every sound in the room. In the kitchen, Ruth brewed coffee, her ears sharp, her presence steady. She had agreed to be my hidden witness, sitting out of sight, but ready to hear every word. At 9 o'clock, my lawyer arrived. A quiet man with sharp eyes, he looked surprised at the urgency of my request. Are you certain, Mrs. Margaret? He asked after reading the changes I had dictated. These are drastic alterations. Completely certain, I replied, signing each page with a hand that did not tremble. I want it recorded that this is my choice, made freely, with no coercion. I know exactly what I am doing. By 10 o'clock it was done. The new will was legal, binding, and unbreakable. My house, my savings, everything I had worked for would go not to Daniel, not to Claudia, but to a foundation for single mothers fighting to survive. Women like me. Women who had given everything and deserved more than scorn in return. When the lawyer left, Ruth squeezed my shoulder. You're braver than you know, she whispered, but bravery was not enough. I needed proof, undeniable proof, of what Daniel and Claudia truly were. That was where the basement came in. I had spent months building my archive. Photographs of bruises from the times Daniel shoved me during our arguments. Copies of bank statements that showed the loans he never repaid. Screenshots of Claudia's cruel text messages mocking me to her friends. Transcripts of recorded conversations where they plotted to put me in a senior home and demolish my farmhouse for profit. Every shred of evidence was taped to the walls of that basement, like pieces of a puzzle only I could see fully. At precisely 11, I heard the crunch of tires on gravel. Daniel's car. My heart pounded, but not with fear, with anticipation. I opened the door before they could knock, lowering my eyes, masking my defiance with an act of surrender. Good morning, I murmured. I was expecting you. Daniel strode in like a conqueror, Claudia gliding behind him with her false smile. Perfect, he said. I knew a night of reflection would knock sense into you. Did you call the lawyer? I did, I answered softly. The new will is already prepared. His shoulders relaxed and Claudia's smirk widened. She settled on the sofa like a queen taking her throne. And what exactly does it say? I handed them a copy, a fake crafted for this moment. It named Daniel as my sole heir, every penny, every acre, every brick his. Their eyes lit up their relief, almost comical. Excellent, Daniel said, scanning the lines. I knew you would come to your senses. Yes, I whispered. I came to my senses completely. Claudia tucked the paper into her purse like a trophy. Now there's another matter we need to discuss. This house is far too much for you. Daniel and I have found a senior facility that would suit you better. You'll have medical staff, other people your age, all the care you need. I tilted my head. A facility, yes, Daniel confirmed. It's for your own good, Mom, and we'll need this property available soon. The lot is worth nearly $400,000 once we clear it. With your savings, that's $500,000, enough for us to build our dream home. Their words burned into me, but I kept my face calm. I see, I murmured. Tomorrow, then we'll go see it. Tomorrow, Claudia said with satisfaction. I paused, then smiled faintly. But before we make such a big change, there's something I want to show you. Something of your grandfather's Daniel. A family keepsake. It's in the basement. Curiosity lit their eyes. Greed does not only hunger for money, it also craves secrets. They followed me down the creaking wooden stairs, their steps echoing in the shadows. When the light flicked on, their triumph drained away. They froze, staring at the walls lined with photographs, documents, transcripts. Every inch of that basement was covered with evidence of their cruelty. "What is all this?" Claudia whispered, her voice trembling. "This," I said, my voice calm, steady, strong, is the truth. Every lie, every insult, every theft, every bruise, every word, every plan. I've been documenting it all." Daniel stepped forward, scanning the bank statements pinned to one wall. His face grew pale. "Mom, why? Why would you do this?" "Because I knew one day I would need to show the world who you truly are." Claudia grabbed a stack of transcripts, her voice rising. "This is illegal. You can't record private conversations." "Actually, I can," I said evenly. "In my own home, I have every right. And when it's evidence of abuse, the law is on my side." Silence filled the basement. Daniel's eyes darted from the photographs to the documents, then to me. For a moment I saw the boy he once was, terrified of being caught in a lie. But the boy was gone, replaced by a man cornered by his own greed. Then Claudia saw it, the open laptop on the center table, the little green light glowing. Her face drained of color. "What is that?" I smiled. "That is my insurance. For the last 30 minutes, everything we've said has been streamed live. To my lawyer, to a social worker, and to a journalist who happens to specialize in stories of elder abuse." Daniel staggered backward as though I had struck him. "Mom, what have you done?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied. "I protected myself." "From you." Claudia dropped the transcripts, her hands shaking. "This isn't over. We'll contest the will. We'll prove you're not of sound mind." "Go ahead," I said, stepping closer. "Explain to a judge why a woman who carefully documented months of threats and neglect doesn't have the right to decide her own legacy." Their eyes darted wildly, panic replacing arrogance. For the first time since Claudia entered my life, she was speechless. Daniel sank into an old chair, his head in his hands. I turned to the wall and pointed at the largest sheet pinned there, a copy of my real will. "This," I said, "is the truth. Every cent of what I have will go to women who fight for their children the way I fought for you. Women who will not let their sacrifices be mocked. Not one penny goes to you." Daniel's shoulders slumped. Claudia's hands clenched into fists. The trap had closed. And yet as I watched their faces crumble, I knew this war was not finished. Greed does not surrender easily. They would not walk away without a fight. The look on their faces in the basement was only the beginning. They had walked into that cellar believing they would walk out with power, but they emerged with their world collapsing. Still, I knew they would not surrender easily. Greed does not die quietly. It claws, it bites, it refuses to let go until it is crushed. 2 days later, my story was everywhere. The local newspaper ran the headline, "The Price of Indifference, When Children Betray Their Own." My neighbor Mark, the investigative journalist, had crafted the article from the evidence I handed him. He printed the transcripts, the photographs, even snippets from the recordings. He exposed every plan Claudia and Daniel had whispered in secret, every cruel word they thought no one would ever hear. The article spread like wildfire through the town. At the grocery store, whispers followed them. At the post office, people turned their backs. What had once been admiration for the young lawyer and his elegant wife became disgust. Elder abuse was a word that carried shame too heavy for even Daniel's expensive suits to cover. Daniel's firm called him into the office within hours of the article's release. By the end of the day, he was unemployed. "We cannot have our reputation tied to such behavior," the partners told him, according to the letter that arrived at my house days later. His career, the life I had mortgaged my home to build, was over in an instant. Claudia fared no better. Her work at the event planning company depended on her image, her charm, her ability to smile and win trust. But no smile could erase the words she had spoken, now immortalized in print. "She's a pathetic burden. Put her in a facility and demolish the house." Within a week, she was dismissed. Clients withdrew their contracts. Her world of glittering events crumbled into dust. At first, I thought that might be enough. Losing their reputations, their jobs, their standing in the community, it was punishment enough. But then the court papers arrived. Claudia had filed to contest my will. Daniel signed his name alongside hers, claiming I was not of sound mind, that I had been manipulated by neighbors, that the documents I produced were exaggerated or false. They thought they could twist the law into their last weapon. I walked into that courtroom with my head held high. Ruth stood at my side, my lawyer beside her. Daniel and Claudia sat across the aisle, their faces pale, their clothes, no longer polished with wealth, but worn with desperation. The judge listened as their attorney painted me as a confused old woman, lonely and unstable, guided into rash decisions by gossiping neighbors. Claudia sat there nodding, pretending to dab her eyes with a tissue. Daniel kept his gaze on the floor as if ashamed, though I knew it was not shame but fear of losing what little he thought he still controlled. When it was my turn, I stood slowly, my cane steady in my hand. "Your Honor," I said, my voice clear. "They call me unstable. They call me confused. But I have been more clear in these last months than I have in decades." I gestured toward the evidence: photographs of bruises, bank statements, audio recordings, video clips from the live stream. Each piece was laid out like the chapters of a story too cruel to deny. The courtroom fell silent as the judge listened to Daniel's voice on the recording, shouting that I would regret disinheriting him, his tone sharp, his words venom. Claudia shifted uncomfortably as the transcripts of her own insults were read aloud, each sentence dripping with disdain. The judge's eyebrows furrowed deeper with every line. When it was over, the decision was swift. The will was valid, the evidence undeniable. Their challenge was dismissed. But the ruin did not end in the courtroom. That was only the legal defeat. The personal one was far worse. Weeks later, I stood at the window of my farmhouse and watched Daniel walk up the gravel path alone. His shoulders were hunched, his suit wrinkled, his shoes scuffed. Claudia was gone. She had left him the moment his career crumbled, and the money dried up. The woman who had once whispered promises of dreams now spat curses as she walked away with her brother Victor, leaving Daniel abandoned in the wreckage. He knocked softly on the door, his voice trembling. "Mom, please, let me in. Can we talk?" I opened the door just enough to see his face. His eyes were hollow, his skin pale, as though the weight of his choices had finally crushed him. "I've lost everything," he whispered. "My job, my wife, my home. I have nothing left. Please, Mom, please forgive me." For a moment, I almost faltered. The sight of him broken and desperate stirred the maternal instinct that had defined my life for so long, the instinct to comfort, to protect, to forgive. But then I remembered. I remembered the phone. He smashed the words. He hissed the fever that burned me while he sat with Claudia planning kitchens and vacations. "No," I said simply. His eyes widened. "Please, I know I was wrong. I know I hurt you. But I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" I shook my head slowly. "You stopped being my son the day you threatened me in my own home. You stopped being my son when you chose greed over love. You want forgiveness. Earn it for yourself. But you won't find it here." I closed the door. His fist pounded once, twice against the wood, then stilled. I stood on the other side, listening to his sobs, his pleas, his footsteps retreating down the gravel path. My heart ached, but it did not break. Not this time. The town continued to whisper about them. Daniel, the lawyer who betrayed his mother. Claudia, the wife who schemed for wealth and lost everything. Their names became warnings, not titles. Their story, a lesson whispered to children: never forget the hands that raised you. As for me, I walked through the farmhouse with lighter steps. My walls no longer felt like a prison. They felt like protection. For the first time in years, I was not afraid. I was free. But freedom, I realized, was not the end of the story. Because as much as I had gained my dignity, I had also lost my only child. And though the world saw my victory, my nights still echoed with questions. Was it worth it? Could there have been another way? The answer I decided would not come from me. It would come from the quiet, from the choices I made now, from the life I built with the years I had left. And above all, from one truth that had burned itself into my soul. Love without respect is not love at all. The day Daniel stood on my porch for the last time is carved into my memory as sharply as the day I buried his father. He looked nothing like the proud man who once paraded through my farmhouse with Claudia on his arm, eyes gleaming with arrogance. He looked worn down, his hair, unkempt dark circles carved beneath his eyes. His suit hung loose on his frame, as though the weight of shame had hollowed him out. I opened the door a crack just enough to see his face. The gravel crunched beneath his shoes as he shifted nervously, hands twisting together like a child about to confess a lie. "Mom," he whispered. His voice was small, broken. "Please, I know I've made mistakes. I know I hurt you, but I've lost everything. Claudia's gone. My job, my friends, my home, it's all gone. You're the only one I have left." For a moment my heart faltered. I saw not the man who had threatened me, but the boy who once clung to my hand during thunderstorms. The boy who begged me to read him one more story before bed, who whispered promises that he would always take care of me when I grew old. That boy still lived inside him, buried beneath layers of cruelty and greed. But could I dig him out? Should I even try? He stepped closer, his eyes wet with tears. "Please, Mom, give me one more chance. Let me stay here just for a while. I'll change, I promise." I held the door firm. "Daniel, I've given you chance after chance, 30 years of chances. Every time you cut me, I covered the wound and opened my arms again. And every time you cut deeper, forgiveness without consequences is not love. It's cowardice. And I am done being a coward." His tears spilled freely, now streaking down his face. "But I'm your son. Doesn't that mean anything?" It meant everything, I said softly. "But you buried that meaning the day you chose to see me as an obstacle instead of your mother, the day you smashed my phone, the day you told me my sacrifices were mistakes, the day you left me sick and alone. Being my son was not a title you could carry without honor. You gave it away." He tried to wedge his foot in the door, desperation twisting his face. "Please. I don't know where else to go." I pushed firmly, stronger than I thought possible. "You should have thought of that before you burned every bridge. I am not your safety net. Not anymore." The door shut with a finality that echoed through my bones. On the other side, I heard him collapse against the wood, sobbing, pleading, pounding, once before his strength gave way to silence. I stood there, leaning against the door, my own tears spilling, but I did not open it again. For half an hour I listened. His voice rose cracked, then fell quiet. Finally, the crunch of gravel retreated, the engine of his car roared, and then there was nothing but silence, the silence of an ending. I turned back to the farmhouse, my farmhouse, and felt the weight lift. For the first time in decades, the air did not taste of fear or obligation. It tasted of freedom. In the weeks that followed, the town whispered of Daniel's downfall. People pitied him, some scorned him, but none defended him. Claudia vanished, completely rumored to have moved to another city with her brother Victor. Their names became a cautionary tale spoken in hushed tones at church gatherings and grocery aisles. Parents used them as lessons for their children: never forget the hands that raised you. As for me, I began to live again. Ruth visited daily, bringing laughter and warmth into the farmhouse. Together we tended the garden, pruned the rose bushes, and sat on the porch with cups of tea, watching the sun dip below the horizon. For years I had sat on that porch waiting for Daniel's car to pull into the driveway. Now I sat watching the beauty of a sunset I had been too busy to notice. I donated my savings to the foundation I had chosen, visiting their offices to meet the women whose lives my decision would touch. I saw young mothers with babies in their arms, their eyes filled with the same desperation I had once carried. But in those offices I also saw hope. My sacrifices would not die with me. They would live on in the dreams of others. At night, lying in my bed, I sometimes thought of Daniel. I wondered where he slept, what he ate, whether the boy I once knew still lingered somewhere in the man he had become. My heart ached, but it did not break. The ache was softer now. The ache of acceptance, not longing. One evening Ruth asked me quietly, "Do you regret it, Margaret?" Closing the door on him for good, I looked out at the horizon where the last light of the day painted the sky in streaks of gold and crimson. "No," I said firmly, "because the truth is I didn't close the door on my son. I closed it on the stranger he became. The boy I loved is gone, and if he ever comes back, truly comes back, I'll see it then. But until that day, I choose myself." She nodded, squeezing my hand. "That's not selfish, that's survival." I smiled faintly. For 68 years I believed survival meant sacrificing for others. Now I know survival means valuing yourself enough to stop bleeding for people who never stop cutting. That night I slept without dreams. The farmhouse creaked in the quiet, but it no longer felt heavy. It felt alive, as though it too had been waiting for me to choose freedom. Weeks turned into months, and with each passing day I grew stronger. Not younger, not healthier, but stronger in spirit. My reflection in the mirror no longer showed a woman consumed by grief. It showed a woman who had endured, who had risen, who had reclaimed her life. One afternoon, as I sat at the table writing in my journal, I wrote a single sentence that summed up the journey of my life. I gave everything to my son, but in the end I gave myself back to me. And for the first time in decades, those words did not hurt. They healed. The final door had closed, but beyond it, another had opened. A door to dignity, a door to peace, a door to freedom. Margaret's journey reminds us of one of the hardest truths a parent can face. You can give your entire life to a child, you can sacrifice everything, and still they may choose greed, pride, or cruelty over love. For years, she believed her role was to forgive endlessly, to keep giving even as her heart was torn apart. But in the end, she discovered that forgiveness without consequences is not love, it is surrender. Her story is not only about betrayal, it is about awakening. It is about the moment when a mother who has been silenced, humiliated, and treated as nothing finally stands up and declares that she deserves respect. Margaret lost her son, but she gained something more valuable. She gained her dignity. She learned that love without respect is empty, and that sometimes the only way to save yourself is to close the door even if it breaks your heart. This family drama is not just her story. It is the story of countless mothers and fathers who have given everything only to be treated as if they were nothing. It is a reminder that boundaries are not cruelty, they are survival. That valuing yourself is not selfish, it is necessary. And that sometimes the greatest act of love you can show to yourself and to others is refusing to let abuse continue. If this story touched you, if it made you think about sacrifice, dignity, and the meaning of true respect, please like this video. Subscribe to the channel so you will not miss the next family story. And share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love? Your words might inspire someone else who feels trapped in silence. Because in the end, Margaret's story carries a message for all of us. Love is powerful, but without respect it becomes a chain. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is break it.